In the previous videos in this chapter, we learned about text shadows and text strokes. Now, let's take a look at reflections. Reflections are a little bit different than some of the other properties in this chapter, and you'll learn why over the course of this video. First, however, I'd like to emphasize that reflections are different from text shadows and text stroke in that they're not limited to text. You can actually apply reflections to any page elements, so they're not actually a typographic effect. I'm just including them here though because they are still nonetheless more of a flashy effect and they don't really fit very nicely into any of the other chapters. Anyway, without further ado, let's first try them out on some text and then get into other elements. So here we have a blank page as usual, and if we switch over to our text editor, we'll just go ahead and add in an H1 here, and we'll call this text reflection. And now we're ready to move on to our styling. Again, as usual, just some basic styling here to bootstrap the page. And we need to first style our H1 just so that we can see it a little bit better. We'll align it center, and we'll give it a font size of 4 And there we go. Now first, we're going to create the most basic reflection that we possibly can. So on this H1 here, we're going to add a WebKit box reflect, which is the name of the property. And I'm going to type below, which we'll get to in a second. So when we save that out and refresh, you can see that we now have reflected text. It's a perfect reflection of what we have right up here. So let's switch back to the code and take a look at this. This first argument is what's called direction. This can be set to the constants above, below, left, or right. So let's try making this reflect above instead of below. So when I switch back and refresh, you can see that we now have a perfect reflection above our text instead of below it. Pretty nifty. So let's just go ahead and change that back to below. There we go. And now the next argument is the offset. The offset determines how far away the reflection is relative to the element. Now our reflection by default is actually pretty far away from our text. So let's actually try starting out with a negative value on the offset so that we can draw it in closer to our text. So right after below here, we'll go ahead and put negative 22 pixels, which is going to put us right up against the text. So when we refresh there, you can see that our reflection is right up against our text with no space in between. There, now our reflection is touching the text, and again, this offset is an optional argument. There's one more argument called the mask box image, and this is probably the most complex part of reflections. We can use the alpha channel of transparent images to determine the shape of our reflection. So let's go ahead and add an image mask. So I'll switch back to the text editor, and we do have an images directory here that's above the CSS directory. So I'll just go ahead and type the URL function here, and we'll jump out of our CSS directory and dive into the images directory. And I have an image of the Safari logo, which we'll see a little bit later. And I'm going to type 0 and round. And so here we have the path to the image offset, and the repeat style, which in this case I'm setting to round. So when we switch back, you can see that we now have kind of a funky looking reflection here, and that's actually the Safari logo shining through. So we'll see that image come up a little bit later. We've created a basic reflection, but there's still more to learn. In the next video, we'll try a few other things with reflections.